Welcome to the news at when? When, 1789, when the people of France decided that King Louis XVI and his rich friends had been living the high life at their expense for long enough, and that it was time for common people to run the country. Here with more details is Bob Hale with the French Revolution report. Bob.
Thank you, Sam. Well, sacre bleu me, if that isn't France, which it is, if it's not the 1780s, which it is, and if that right there isn't a very angry Frenchman, which it is, and he's got every right to be, because back then France was very much a country of le haves and le have-nots, where the posh people have fine food, fancy clothes, palaces and helicopters, while the poor people, like this chap, don't even have the bread on their table. But how can... What? I don't think I did say helicopters. But how do these poshos afford all that stuff, I hear you ask? Well, by taking money from poor taxpayers, like our friend here, and then borrowing even more money from other countries, which means that by 1789, France is riddled with debt, and most French people are penniless and hungrier than an alligator on the moon. All while King Louis XVI and his posh chums are living it up big-styly. Terrible, really, but I guess that's just the way things are, and there's not a lot you can do about it, right? Wrong! The commoners strike up a plan to remove the king and run the country themselves, which signals the start of the one and only, the world-famous, ladies and gentlemen, it's the French Revolution! Vive la Revolution! Sorry, I get a bit carried away. And the revolutionaries don't hang around. They storm the Bastille, a famous old fortress here in Paris, partly to show the king who's boss and partly to steal a load of explosives. Oh! Well, that's angry mobs for you. So King Louis, fearing for his life, dresses up as a Russian aristocrat's butler, little bit weird, and runs off to hide up here in a place called something or other. A cunning plan that works this much. Yep, not at all. The king is captured, he's brought back to Paris and told that he's not in charge anymore. He keeps the crown, but he loses most of his power, influence and helicopters. And that's what? I didn't say helicopters. And things go from bad to worse for King Louis. In 1792, France declares war on Austria, a neighbouring country who want the revolutionaries out and the king back in. So they tell the revolutionaries that if they don't put the king back in, they'll start doing some pretty horrible things to the French people. A very clever tactic that works this much. Yep, not at all. Turns out the revolutionaries just hate being told what to do. They completely ignore the threat, accuse the king of plotting with the Austrians and cut his head off. Then they cut his wife's head off. And then, frankly, they just get a little bit carried away. Soon they are cutting heads off left, right and centre, declaring anyone who doesn't agree with everything they say as an enemy of the revolution, a crime punishable by, yes, you've guessed it, having your head cut off. In fact, if we look at the head cutting off-ometer, we can see that somewhere between 16 and 40,000 heads were cut off in just 2 years. So many, in fact, that they not only broke our thingy, but they had to invent a whole new head-cutting-off thingy called the guillotine. So, at that time, it was all cut his head off, cut her head off, cut his head off, cut her head off, until, finally, after 5 long years and lots of heads being cut off, the people of France said, stop cutting people's heads off! And they took the man responsible for most of the heads being cut off, Maximilian Robespierre, and yep, you've guessed it, they cut his head off. And that's the end of the French Revolution, the end of the French royalty, and if I don't get a cup of tea and a biscuit in the next 3 seconds, it might very well be the end of old Bobsy. Oh, thank you so much, thank you. Oh, that feels so much better. You know, now I think of it, I did say helicopter there, didn't I? I think I just need a holiday. Sam, couple of weeks in the Maldives?